And I want to just acknowledge the appreciation I have for my Carolina, my fellow peers that serve on Black Alumni Council, particularly the Alumni Engagement Committee for their efforts and convening us today for what I believe is going to be a very robust and important conversation. And I'm so excited to share this space with each of you. And particularly, I'm really excited to hear and share and learn with and from my co-host today, Edwin. We have certainly had some conversations just in preparation, so I know this is going to be a time well spent. And so let's just jump right in. How are you doing, Edwin?
You know, I'm doing really well. It's been a super busy last few weeks here in Minneapolis, but tonight really does give me great energy, so I'm glad to be here.
No, fantastic. We know that you're really busy, so we appreciate you accommodating your schedule to be with us this evening. So I want to talk a little bit back first about your background. You know, we've heard your credentials. Amber just made us all familiar with that, but it's always good for us to hear about something beyond what's in your bio, right? So let's talk about your time at USC. Tell us a little bit about your time there. Talk about your studies, your leadership affiliations, and how you matriculated to where you are now. Let's get to know Edwin before we jump into the heavy conversation that this evening will bring.
Yeah. So I am born and raised in a small town down in Orange River County called Bowman, South Carolina. I got to shout out Bowman first. Small metropolis down there, one caution light, no traffic light at all. Came to USC in '98, where I met my best friend who's on the call right now, said June, and we made it through USC together, sometimes dragging each other through, sometimes encouraging each other. Joined the world's greatest fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Zeta Epsilon chapter. Shout out to the Nukes on the call. Was also very active in AAAS, was the president of Bond, Brothers of Nubian Descent, for a year or so. Was a university ambassador, worked at the Board of Trustees office. I was all over the place. I really do think the things that I did outside of the classroom added as much to my journey at Carolina as my actual degree did. And so it's just a place that I love and that I still hold with high regards.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And so while you're doing some shout outs, I didn't know we were going to go there, but since we are, I'm going to shout out all Divine Nine, but of course I have to give a very special shout out to the lovely ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, especially if you matriculated through Theta Gamma at the University of South Carolina. Where are you? Let me know. Fantastic. No, it's all in fun. And again, we do welcome and appreciate all of Divine Nine representation that's here right now on this call with us. So thank you for telling us a little bit about your time at USC. So talk about what you're doing now and how what you did at USC prepared you to transition into the role that you assume now.
Yep. So as Amber shared, I'm the senior pastor at the Sanctuary Covenant Church here in North Minneapolis, so just north of downtown. We're an intentionally multi-ethnic church. We're about 50% white, 40% African American, and the other 10% is a mixture of Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, and international families. And so it's super diverse church, more casual than the traditional Baptist churches that I'd grown up in and even served prior to this. We are committed to sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus. And we do that with a particular emphasis on social justice. And so I've been here as on staff for about 9 years this year. First came as a youth pastor, then moved into an associate pastor role, and became the lead pastor about a year ago now. So my work today really is not just to be a pastor within the four walls of the church, but I really do see myself as what I would describe as a public theologian, wrestling with the fact of what does my faith in Jesus have to do with the way I live my life and the way I encourage our people to live our lives day to day. And so 3 weeks ago, we were really pushed into the epicenter of the struggle for freedom in this country when a Minneapolis police officer knelt on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and even stayed there once he had died. And within an instant, the eyes of the world were on Minneapolis. And so our church, because of our commitment to justice, we've always had a posture of when there are hard times in our community, instead of pulling back away from the community, we lean in and move towards the people, trying to be a peaceful presence in the hands and feet of Jesus. And so we're about 10 minutes from where Mr. Floyd died. And in that first night of looting, we could tell that what was happening in South Minneapolis, where it happened, was definitely going to impact our community really soon. North Minneapolis is a historically challenged community in some of the ways many urban areas are. High unemployment, high crime rate, schools that are underperforming. And so we have this constant ministry to our community, trying to be, again, the hands and feet of Jesus. And so that day, as we saw the tenor and the tension in the community rising, there had been some minor looting in the community the night before, and people were essentially right next to our church selling some of the items that had been looted the night before. And we knew that if we had not moved towards a community, it would probably get pretty bad pretty quickly. And so we did what we've done so many times before. We pulled out our grills and started just grilling food, serving people, trying to just, again, be a peaceful presence. Somehow the word got out that we were serving and giving groceries out. And so overnight, we had dozens and dozens of people stopping by to drop off donations. And we really became a makeshift food distribution center. And since that time, we've served thousands of families groceries. The primary grocery store in our community is right across from our church, and it was looted and burned that first night. And so people are food insecure right now, and our church was able to step in and fill that need. And it has really given us an opportunity just to see the community, to love on the community, and see them, have them see that the church is not just a bunch of old folks singing hymns and telling testifying about what God has done. It really is an active part of the work of the church to love on the community. And so that's what we're doing now.
That is so awesome. And I just want to take an opportunity now on behalf of this whole community here to thank you, Edwin, you and your parishioners, for during such a tumultuous time, seeing the need to show forth a level of empathy, compassion, and love. I think that certainly helps to instill hope, especially when we're so troubled by what's happening right now with the racial injustice
Absolutely.
crisis. And so thank you for your work. I would imagine that the dynamics in terms of the shifting in the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion takes on a unique position when you are a pastor of a church that has parishioners that cross all different demographics. And so Can you talk a little bit about how the conversation has changed, maybe specifically as a result of what's happening now with the racial injustice crisis?
Yeah, the benefit of what we're experiencing is that this is a central issue for us, regardless of what's happening. We firmly believe that the work of racial reconciliation, the tearing down of walls between people because of race and class and gender and all those things, we feel that's core to the gospel. And so there's probably not a Sunday where you would show up at Sanctuary and not hear about the justice work that's happening, the ways in which we're fighting against all the isms that impact our society. When we look at who our leaders are, we are intentional about raising up leaders of color and women so that we can fight against those isms in meaningful ways. And so when something like this happens, I think the average church has to find a way to get into those conversations. Some of you probably saw the conversation that took place a few days ago between Lecrae and a megachurch pastor in Atlanta. And it was very clumsy. And I think, and I can say that without being too harsh, because I know that pastor has had tons of opportunities. He's from Atlanta, and this is a part of the ongoing work of, I think, any church in the South especially. He's had opportunities to learn how to lead his church in these kind of conversations. But what we saw from him was that he was scrambling. He was trying to make sense of this and somehow have something to say. For us here at Sanctuary, we're always having these conversations. And so this is not the place where when something like Mr. Floyd's death happens, we have to decide, oh my God, how do we talk about this kind of stuff? We're
Mm-hmm.
always talking about it. And in fact, I think people will come here and within 2 to 3 weeks, they can determine whether or not this is a church for them. And if you're the kind of person who is fragile and don't want to talk about race and don't want to talk about white supremacy and don't want to talk about the ways in which the church has often either been silent on these issues or have helped to perpetuate these issues, you quickly determine this is not the church for you. And we love people and bless them when they come, but we also bless them when they leave if that's not something they're willing to do and talk about. And so for us, it really has been, I won't say easy work, but it's been natural work for us to lean into these conversations. Right now, the big conversation in the city of Minneapolis is around the move to abolish the police department. And for some pastors, it would seem very treacherous to lean into that conversation. I've actually had great opportunity to be a public part of that conversation because it fits this theme that we've been working through since the beginning of Sanctuary's history around the ways in which a church is not just trying to get people to heaven, we're also trying to help people to experience the kingdom of God here on earth. And that means cops not putting their knee on your neck. That's a very tangible expression of the kingdom of God in my mind.
Absolutely, very well stated. So I've been holding space with a lot of community groups and different organizations as they are trying to navigate the complexities of what's happening now with the racial injustice. And those have been some really heavy conversations because you're forcing people to be present with their emotions, to lean into their vulnerabilities. And I have found storytelling to be a very powerful tool to help people to get proximate to the issues of the lived experiences that oftentimes privilege will not allow some people who don't necessarily look like you and I, Edwin, to realize. And then they will pretend as though the issues do not exist. And so I always like asking the question, you know, what was a defining moment for you that made you awaken to racism?
Yeah, I honestly feel like just very early on, because of how I grew up, I was aware of the differences, not just between Black and white people, but aware of the differences of who had power and who did not. I remember in elementary school, there were a couple times I talk a lot, and I've always talked a lot, and I got in trouble for that as a kid. And I remember getting suspended off of the bus when I was like in third or fourth grade, and having to walk to where my grandmother was working, which was close to my elementary school. She was doing housekeeping work, domestic work for a white family. And I was very aware of what my surroundings were in terms of where we lived, the kind of house we had, the things that we had in it. And then I would visit her at work in moments like this one when I got kicked off the bus, and I would see how much nicer their houses were. And I would see that she had to work all day to take care of those families and then had to come home and take care of her own family. And I just realized that there's a power difference there. There's a difference in terms of not just assets and goods, but she was much older than them, but I saw the way she sort of called them yes sir, yes ma'am, and that kind of stuff. And that always, it caught my interest. I remember one particular time in thinking about my grandfather, where I went to the hardware store. We had a small Ace Hardware there in Bowman. And I remember him looking for some items in the store. And I remember a younger white guy who was working in the store. And I remember just how deferential my grandfather was to him. And it didn't make sense to me. I'm thinking, Granddad, you're 3-4 times his age. Why are you like going so far to be respectful? And I didn't have answers for that stuff then, but I knew something was happening. There was just a power differential. And so at a very early age, I realized that the folks who had the nice houses, the folks who seemed to be in charge at the companies in our small town, the folks who had the nice houses, the folks who got the preferential treatment didn't look like me. And I wondered what that was about. And as I got older, I began to piece more of those things together and realized that our people were not just deprived of like goods and resource, but also power and decision-making capacity. And that in some way inspired me to work hard and get my schoolwork done, because I wanted to I wanted to experience things that I didn't think my grandparents ever had an opportunity to even dream about having. I realized that they sacrificed a lot for me to have opportunities to go to a place like USC or not go to USC if I wanted to. And so whenever there were times where I didn't necessarily feel like doing well in school, I would think back to them and realize, man, get it together because they never had these opportunities.
Right. No, that's good. So I'll briefly share my story when I was awakened to racism. I remember like it was yesterday. I was actually in the sixth grade, and before being school age, the daycare that my parents were working parents. So the daycare that my sister and I attended, they also had a van service where they would pick up kids from school and then take them home. And on this particular day, my family had gotten really close to the owner of this daycare. And on this particular day, when she picked me up, the conversation ensued like it normally does. How are you? How are your parents? You know, is your mom doing okay? Is your dad doing okay? And I'm just answering the questions. Yes, ma'am, everybody is great, not thinking anything of it. And then all of a sudden, this woman, Caucasian woman, who's the owner of this daycare, she said to me as a sixth grader, "Your mother is the most beautiful Black woman I have ever met." And as a sixth grader, if you can imagine, you know, I hadn't been exposed to a whole lot, but I was exposed to enough to know this doesn't feel right. And I think what was so piercing to me is that I was able to understand that from her vantage point, she saw it as a compliment. But for me as a sixth grader, I knew that what that meant was that she thought that people like me, who look like me, my family, were inferior to her. And so, you know, that story may not be as piercing as maybe the story that you shared, but I think that it amplifies the fact that racism is not just about character or the overt acts of bigotry, you know, the blatancy of it. It's also about the socialization, the daily subtle occurrences, and they're much more nuanced than that. And that stood with me for all these years. So I want to shift a little bit as we stay in this vein, though, but I want to talk about the fact that there are a lot of different people that are trying to find their entry into this fight, if you will. And what I have been sharing and hearing a lot of people amplify is the need to give people permission to decide how to get into the fight that's going to work best for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not everybody's going to be out protesting. And I think that's okay. And we have to give people the ability to be okay with that. Everybody needs to get into the fight. Don't sit on the sidelines. But I just want to get your reactions to, there's so many other ways, and help this community to understand that it does not have to be a one-size-fits-all approach. I think about the mentoring, the sponsoring. If you're in positions of power and influence, how do you bring someone else along? And so just want to get your reactions to that, please.
Yeah, I think you answered it already beautifully. There's enough work to go around.
Yeah.
And while there are aspects of what it means to fight for justice and to uplift our people that are definitely more visible and more on the front lines, everybody doesn't need to be on the mic at the protest. Everybody doesn't need to be at the march, perhaps. We need folks who are attorneys who are getting people out of jail. We need folks who are good with communication to use the internet and social media to spread the news of what's going on as well. We need people, I believe, in every single sector to be committed to the work of uplift and freeing our people. When I think about the folks that I went to USC with, or as you guys say now, U of SC, I can't get used to that. When I think about the friends that I had at school, they're all doing some incredible things. It would be absurd for me to look down on them and say, "Hey, man, I haven't seen you leading the march. Like you're not serving our people." There are many of them who are serving in ways beyond what can be seen, but everybody's doing something. And so I think you take inventory of what are the things you're gifted at, what are the things you feel called to, what are the ways in which the skills you have, the gifts that you have, the resources that you have can be used for the good of others, and you employ those. The other piece is that I don't think our people necessarily do a good job of sometimes choosing to rest as a part of protest. We will literally march ourselves to death and be of no good to anybody else. And these issues will be right here in years to come. And so there, I think as a part of our protest, self-care is a part of protest. It's a form of resistance. I'm gonna take care of myself. I'm gonna make sure I'm healthy. I'm gonna go see my therapist because I'm not gonna let racism drive me to an early grave.
No, I love that. And just to add to it, while we're talking about the protests, and I'm one, you know, I don't spend all my time at protests. I've been to two, and I feel like my lane is more behind the desk, you know, being able to talk some of these leaders off of the ledge while they're in the midst of these, you know, this crisis and trying to navigate that in their organizations. But one thing that I will say is the importance of, you know, to your point of taking care of self. I saw a meme just recently and it talked about, hey, all of us who are out there protesting, that's good and fine to make sure that Black Lives Matter and that they are protected, but wear your mask because that's how we're protecting Black lives too. And I thought to myself, yes, I really appreciated that message. And so I bring that up because I think it's a good alignment with what you just shared, but equally important, we can't forget that this racial injustice, uprising, and crisis that we're in right now is right on the top of this global pandemic where we are still dealing with the looming effects of COVID. And so I think certainly it's important for us to bring some light and illuminate that in this conversation. So I'm going to ask maybe two more questions, but before I do that, I want to just again remind the audience that this is an opportunity for us to learn with and from each other. And just a second, we will open up the line. I will ask my colleague Amber to identify some questions that have already been identified in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance yet to think of some questions, feel free to do so while we engage in maybe another two additional questions. So I want to hear from your vantage point, Edwin. What have you seen in terms of examples of how people are showing up for each other, especially, of course, members of the Black community right now? What's been most meaningful to you based upon what you're seeing or what you're hearing?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out again to my my big brother, my best friend Cedric. So he had a birthday recently, and so we did a Zoom call for his birthday, and I hopped on the call, and the call quickly shifted from celebrating his birthday to us as guys checking in on one another.
Oh, yeah,
it's as simple as that. Most people don't have anybody who's going to ask them with any sort of regularity, how are you actually doing? And that's especially important if you work in mostly white spaces, because you're at work all day trying to hold it together. You're trying to be professional as not to go off at work. And then you get home and there's nobody who's asking you how you're doing. That's unhealthy. And so one of the very simple ways we can look out for one another is just to check in on one another with that simple question, how are you doing? And then a follow-up question, no, how are you really doing? Like giving each other permission to be really honest with how we're feeling. The other thing that I've seen, because of the way our church has been responding here on the grounds in Minneapolis, that means I'm away from home, away from our house, almost every day now. And so I've seen some folks within our church, our friend group, really reach out to my wife and extend her care to ask if they could bring us over dinner. I think the folks who are out front leading, trying to care for our people, one of the unfortunate things is that their families often suffer so that they can work for the good of the broader community. And so someone needs to be intentionally checking on the families of those who are out there doing what's good for the community. And I've just really appreciated the friends that we have who send over dinner, who stop by, who are checking in on my wife, so that she's not bearing all the family stuff on her own. I think those are two simple examples of how we can care for one another.
No, I so appreciate that, Edwin. And from a perspective that you're speaking in terms of being a pastor, I recognize that you hold and carry the burdens of so many people in your community. And what's happening right now, if you are a person of color, if you are Black, you're dealing with your own emotional toll. And so that's really compounded. And so again, you know, my heart and my prayers go out to you and your family. I'm glad to know that you feel well supported. I'm going to make sure that before we get off of this line this evening that we have your information in the chat. So if someone feels led to want to send you a note of encouragement, a love offering, whatever it is, that this community is able to do that for you. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
I wanted to share a couple thoughts of talking about what we can do to hold space, particularly for those of us that are being directly impacted, those of us who are Black, right? I like being very specific with my language these days because I think it's necessary. But we do have some colleagues on the line that are standing in solidarity with the Black community, and perhaps they're at a place where they're a bit paralyzed and they don't know exactly what to do that's meaningful and that's useful, because allyship is about not assigning yourself that title, but earning that title because you are exercising and practicing useful work that is in support of the group that you're allying with. And I just want to offer up a couple thoughts and phrases that as you encounter your Black colleagues, Black neighbors, Black community members that you're in association with, even if it's just as simple as saying, I am with you, I see you, I hear you, acknowledging and denouncing racism. This is not right. I want to change this. I want to be a part of the problem. I think that that carries a lot of weight. So I wanted to offer that up. And then my last question for you, Edwin, before we transition to some of the questions from the community here is, I find that right now, because things are so heavy for so many of us as we're going through this complex time, and as you mentioned before, that really can be unhealthy for us physically and mentally. And so I want you, and I think you're so appropriate to talk about this as a pastor, but I want you to talk about the importance of hope. Instill hope into this community right now, because there are a lot of us that have a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of fear, uncertainty. I've heard the word traumatized used. I've heard the word grief-stricken used. And so, but I think it's important that while we're present with our emotions, that we also do not lose hope. And so I want to give you an opportunity just to speak some hope into this community and help us understand the importance of that.
absolutely, absolutely. I found myself working hard to strike a good balance in these times around being very honest about how I'm feeling. Feel all the feels is the way we describe it on our team here. Like if you need to cry, cry. If you need to vent, let's vent together. Let's get together and talk about it. And so feel what you need to feel, but don't get lost in those negative feelings. I think particularly for my Black brothers and sisters who are on this call, and I was very excited about this particular call because it's one of the few conversations I've had so far where it's been predominantly us. And so it's good to see all these brown faces looking back at me. But we come from a rich heritage of people who have overcome incredible odds to get where we are today. And so I think a part of what allows me to maintain hope is simply knowing the story of my people. I grew up in Orangeburg County, not far from the site of the Orangeburg Massacre. When I came to USC, I got to study with Dr. Cleveland Sellers. We have living legends and examples all around us in the Carolina community. And I think we owe it to ourselves to know their work, know their story, know their stories of overcoming, because it gives us perspective in times like this where you honestly can feel like, I'm tired of marching. I'm tired of saying his name or her name. Like I really do want to be able to live my life, but it seems like we're always in this moment of having to fight to get people to observe the basic humanity that we have. And so knowing the rich heritage that we come from, that there is resilience in our blood, I think allows us to have hope. Hope for me also comes in my faith in Jesus, that regardless of how things look in this life, there is another life to come, and the kingdom of heaven is actually breaking through in this life. That gives me hope. And so while things might look one way to me in the natural, I realize that this battle is as much spiritual as it is anything. And that gives me hope as well. The other thing that I really have found that helps me is finding space to celebrate. Tomorrow's Juneteenth. Maybe tomorrow the goal for all of us, all people who look like us, is to do as much celebrating as we can. Like fire up that grill, fire up that grease, put some fish in the grease, like have that fish fry, get that red cup, like splurge a little bit and get the good drink. I know I'm a pastor, but I can say this: get you something to drink. Like have a good time tomorrow, because our people have earned the right to celebrate who we are. We can get back to the marching on Saturday or early next week, but like take some time and celebrate, because you need that, because this is a marathon. This is not going to be over by Tuesday, and you owe it to yourself to find space to celebrate.
Fantastic. I love that. Get your red cup. Let's celebrate
Yeah.
our Blackness.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That is really awesome. Okay. So we're going to go now to the chat room. And then, of course, we're going to give you a chance also to unmute yourself to ask your question or to contribute to this community dialogue. I'm going to first turn it over to Amber to let us know what's going on in the chat. Are there some questions out there, Amber?
There's a ton of questions. I'm going to read a few, and then if someone would want to unmute yourself and ask aloud, you're welcome to do that. Also, if you ask the question in the chat and you rather read it yourself, that's fine too. So Sarah says, we've been deprived for far too long. Sacrifices have been made and we're still deprived today. What else do we need to do to participate in deserved equality? What can we do?
Do you want to lean in first, Adrian, or would you like for me to? And again,
You
these
go
questions
first.
are for this whole community. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll let you go first. I
Okay.
definitely have some thoughts.
You know, I think we need to spend some time sitting with the discomfort first and foremost, because I find that oftentimes when we feel as though our back's up against the wall and we determine that we need to have some type of action, sometimes we move too quickly. And what we're doing is we are reacting instead of responding, and there is a difference. And so I know that I've been saying to a lot of my white colleagues and friends that don't try to let this discomfort pass you by too quickly. You know, I know that the tendency is to want to move beyond this place of feeling guilt and shame and pain. But I think the best thing we can do for ourselves is to allow that to permeate in a way whereby we continue to want to be in this fight once the conversation dies down, once the headlines are turning to something else. And so I think that's important because it gives us the ammunition, if you will, to continue to be in this fight in whatever capacity that we deem appropriate for ourselves. I also think that this is a great time for us to really lean into our vulnerabilities. Let's start self-educating. Let's start self-advocacy. You know, I mentor a lot of people, and I always say that no one can help you get to where you want to go if you're not vocal about what it is that you want. And so sometimes we have to take responsibility just for communicating to our supervisors, our directors, you know, what is it that we want, and be very specific about that. I'm saying the same to allies. You know, it's not enough just to say, I'm an ally and I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Your allyship needs to be useful. It needs to be useful from the perspective of the person you're allying with. And so specificity is really key for us right now, educating ourselves. And if we have the emotional capital to educate others, to do that as well. Some of us don't have that, and that's fine. And you are in that right. You're in that right to just, you know, tell them to go and educate themselves, direct them to resources if you want to, but don't carry that extra burden if you don't have to. But most importantly, take care of self so that you can continue to be in the fight. Sit with the discomfort long enough to make sure that you are responding and not reacting. And as you said before, Edwin, we need to make sure that we continue to instill hope in ourselves and to others. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I think a part of the question asked her about deserved equality, like when do we get to that place? I think we have to be willing to be okay with spending as much time as we need in spaces where your worth and your value is not up for question. I'm not gonna spend my whole day trying to convince people that my life matters. Right. If that's a question for you, you're not the kind of person I want to be around. Mm-hmm. And so I know everybody can't be in like exclusively Black spaces all the time, but there are spaces in your city, in your community, where nobody's wondering if you matter. They know you matter and they treat you with the respect. When we first moved to Minnesota, we lived out in a suburb of Minneapolis, and my wife would always joke that when she needed to know that she was special, she would come to the part of the city that we live in now, because the brothers there, they're gonna let you know. Like they might be trying to holler, but they let you know that you're valuable and that you are desirable and all that kind of stuff. I think we can look for those spaces in our day-to-day life. Like where are the spaces where, whether it's hanging out in the barbershop, getting to know, post-COVID, of course, getting just time with the fellas, or whatever you do, get into those spaces where your value, your worth, your the value of who you are is not up for question. I don't think we need to continue to subject ourselves all the time to this battle of does your Black life matter? Of course it does.
Absolutely. You mentioned your wife, and I want to give honor where it's due. I believe that I saw her name, so I think that she's joining this community as well. Her name is Shaniqua, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
we welcome you to this conversation. Thanks so much for being with us this evening as well. Okay, next question, Amber.
And Shaniqua's also a TG Soar, so
Oh,
shout out.
I knew there was something that led me to want to acknowledge.
Wow.
So there were a lot of amens in the chat when you were talking about self-care and taking the time to rest and pause. And one of the questions I got directly specific to you, Edrin, is knowing that you're serving such a large community in your church, how are you taking care of yourself? What does self-care look like for you as a pastor?
Yeah, some weeks it looks terrible, but I'll explain how it looks when it works well. In COVID, like right before COVID, my wife was almost prophetic in buying a Peloton bike, and so daily a part of my self-care is getting 20 to 30 minutes on that bike. It really does impact your mood to get a little sweat going, get those endorphins going, and so that's a part of my self-care. I take a Sabbath day each week. So pastors, it's hard to get a day off, and but I take either a Friday or a Monday off each week, where I try to forget that my church actually exists. Like I just want to be Taylor and Harper's dad, Shaniqua's husband, and I try to do that weekly. I meet with a therapist every other week. I love Jesus. I trust in the transforming power of the gospel, but I also need a therapist to talk me through some of the stuff that I encounter. And so I do that regularly with my therapist. I've really begun to turn into my grandfather as well. I love doing lawn work these days. And so I'm outside cutting the grass a couple times a week. I'm messing around with the flowers and stuff. I'm out in the yard doing something. And I found that that has been one of my most treasured times these days, when I'm not speaking in front of a camera, or I'm not talking to somebody or walking with somebody through crisis. I'm outside digging in the dirt, and I don't know why that works for me right now, but it actually does work, and it's a part of my self-care.
That's great. So before maybe Amber takes the next question, does someone like to maybe unmute yourself and share your question directly, or maybe your comments to the discussion? If so, we want to give you an opportunity to do that now. Anyone?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Butch Michael, and I matriculated outside of the University of South Carolina, USC, as Edrin said, back in '83. But when I was there, we could see the growth in the Black student population there. And since I've graduated, we've seen it go down. How can we change the racial dynamic at the University of South Carolina for Black students? It seems like it's fine to have an entire sports team, football team, basketball team with all Black players, and they can get into school. But then the students who really need to get into school and try to better themselves, they can't get into school. So how can we change that dynamic so that enrollment for Black students can increase and grow?
I think that's a great question and a great discussion for this community. You know, all of us, well, majority of us, I don't want to presume that everyone on this call certainly is a graduate of U of SC, but, you know, I think that majority of us certainly are. So we have a level of connection and affinity. So we want to see U of SC be a place where all students, particularly those that look like us, are able to be successful, as well as the faculty and the staff members that are part of the U of SC community. As Amber mentioned in the beginning, I know that our efforts from a Black Alumni Council perspective, we're very close to those issues, and we always try to be a voice of advocacy, a voice of support. And I think that there's still some ways to go before the university is one of which we all can feel as though is doing all the right things. I will say this though, I have had the pleasure since my daughter has been at U of SC to get to know some of the Black leaders of the university. And when I tell you that those students are woke and that they're leading with such passion and conviction and unapologetic about their stance on what they want from their university, that has been really inspiring to me. And I think we need to encourage more of that. And so that's what I would add. Edwin, what would you say to that?
I honestly think you almost have to work backwards. Like there's so many obstacles, greater obstacles, I think, today to getting into USC than even when I arrived on campus. I think academically it's a better performing school even now, so that's a good thing. But I would love to see more efforts from the university and perhaps from organizations like this to reach back into the high schools to let folks know that USC is not just a large white school. Like there is a very rich tradition of African-American students, not just being on campus, but excelling at the university. I think of Joteka Edie, I think of Malik Husser, I think of all the Black student body presidents we've had over the years. So we've not just been there, like taking up a little bit of the corner, like we've been excelling on campus. And I think we have to tell that story. The cool thing that I've seen is since I graduated from USC, I've had probably 3 other cousins who've attended and graduated from USC. And so I like to take all the credit for that because I like to think I exposed them to the university. But I do think we need to reach backwards into our schools, into small towns like the one I came from and others, to let them know that the university is a valuable option for them.
No, that's good. And someone just put into the chat the mention of Mayor Steve Benjamin. I mean, certainly as a graduate of the University of South Carolina, him being right there center to the issues that are occurring, I think that helps us as a Black community. And so, you know, to add to what you said, Edwin, yes, we need to make sure that we're reaching back into the high school. But I also think that, and this is a great time for us to amplify this point, for all of you that are on this line as alumni of U of SC, we need to be more present. We need to be more visible. We need to be more hands-on. And so while I know that the efforts of Black Alumni Council works tirelessly to try to bring as many alumni into the fold to get engaged, there are a multitude of ways in which you can come on board with us. And so we look forward to engaging you. So definitely make sure that you reach out to us. Amber gave the information at the start of the call in terms of connecting to My Carolina to understand some of our efforts. And it doesn't have to be a big commitment. You know, I'll tell you that throughout the year, there are a number of opportunities where we engage with the students, whether it's just to mentor them, to talk about our professions, to give them exposure to what's going on in our world. And that has been such a tremendous help. And so if we call on you, we're going to want you to get involved, because that's a great way to help make sure that what we're wanting to protect, which is an inclusive, equitable environment for all the Black community at U of SC to be successful. So thank you for that question, Butch. Is there someone else who would like to unmute yourself and ask a question or contribute to the conversation at this time?
Hey.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Sorry, my name is James Anderson, and I'm here with my wife, Natasha. This is an amazing conversation, so it's going to be a short question. You know, to Edwin, you know, I was heeding a lot of your words, and I just think it's amazing the way that you are, you know, providing that strategic voice and that understanding, that inclusive sort of nature in your church. That's just amazing. How do you, you know, give that advice? What kind of advice do you give to predominantly Black churches where some of us attended when we were growing up? What kind of advice do you give predominantly white churches that are trying to navigate these very complex issues? You know, so that's all. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm a product of the Black church. I love the Black church. I love traditional churches, even though I pastor a church that's more non-traditional. I still, whenever I'm at home, try to get to either the church I grew up in or First Nazareth, which is in Chicago, in downtown Columbia, where I went during college years. I think Black churches are still critically important today. I think as there are more of us who are college graduates and well educated and moving into the middle class and upper class. I hope we don't all feel that we need to be at the sanctuary covenant churches of the world or the elevation churches of the world. We still need that space. That church is still very important. And I think there are some ways in which, in hard times like this, predominantly Black churches are even more critical. What we saw back in 2016, as we moved towards the election of Donald Trump as president, there were many Black people who found multi-ethnic churches like ours, even with the great work we were doing, they found them to be unsafe spaces. They needed to be in those spaces where they could be affirmed, and there was no question around whether or not the person sitting next to you understood your story and your struggle. And so I understood that. Again, I understand the need for us to be in spaces where our value is not up for question. I think to predominantly white churches, I think more and more they are finding that they're doing themselves a disservice by not leaning into these conversations earlier. Again, when the fire's hot is not the time to learn how to handle fire. Like in times of peace, you need to be figuring out, how do we disciple our people to be better Christ followers? And a part of being a Christ follower is learning to love my brother, my sister who does not look like me. I don't want to turn this into a Bible study, but I just have to say quickly, one of the images in the New Testament is of this family, this new community, where those who were once enemies of one another come into community through the blood of Jesus and are drawn into this new family. And I think the church has to lead the way in these kind of conversations. But again, if you haven't done the work before a moment like this happens, maybe this isn't the time for you to be leading the conversation. Like, sit, listen, and learn. And don't just try to get a Black friend right now. Like that wouldn't be the best time to do it. So.
Absolutely. Tyree, I think you wanted to share something. Would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you. It's so good to see so many good faces, Black faces here today. I will say, and it was going back to Butch's previous question, and I think that until many of the students see a lot more faces that look like them on the campus, I don't think that if they're not seeing the representation of themselves, then they kind of are not inclined to come to an institution that doesn't look like them. And I think that we had this conversation in the last Zoom meeting that we had, and while we thanked the president of USC or U of SC, excuse me, for his response, because it is true that while the population is predominantly white, there are students and faculty and staff on campus that are of color, and we want to feel somebody who represents us or at least can speak for us. And so I think that until we have that change in more of us, they can see more of us on campus, they're just not interested. Because I think it was someone who said the number has gone down since they were last on our institution. And I don't know what I can do. I mean, I work for USC at the regional campus, but I work in enrollment management, and I don't know what can I do to drive that number up. And I know we reach out to many schools and many different communities, but like I said, on my campus alone, I think there are about total less than 6 African Americans, people of color. So I think, until we change that dynamic, the students are really not interested.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that the other thing that we can do as a community that, of course, have such an affinity to U of SC is to give to the Richard T. Greener Scholarship. Again, as we have had an experience, let's start making sure that we are putting U of SC in the consideration set of other deserving youth that look like us. So at least, it's part of what they are considering. Those are 2 small things, but you're right. It's hard for you to want to be a part of an environment where you don't feel like you may have a sense of belonging because simply you don't see a lot of people that look like you. And so, yeah, it is certainly the numbers have declined, and that was very evident to some of the recent information that was shared just in this past homecoming weekend. Okay, would someone else like to unmute themselves and share and contribute to our conversation this evening?
Hello? I'll go ahead and
Oh,
go.
hi, we can hear you, Stephen. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank you.
Hello to everyone on the call. Glad to be among so many great Gamecocks. My question, and I'd like to hear from both of you all on this. In today's world where you can subscribe to the type of news that you like, you affirm what you believe through social media, it's easy to continue to get the ideology and outlook that you have ingrained into yourself as true. And so when you have, and what I think we're seeing right now, especially highlighted by George Floyd, was, you know, this culmination of this difference in perspective of what's real and what the world looks like, these two Americas, if you will. And so my question is, how do you try to have effective and respectful conversation when you're highlighting these differences? Because oftentimes people get so emotional during these conversations, right? And, you know, I think it's at those points when you can't really have anything that results in something positive. So if there any insight that you can share on your outlook on that?
That's a great question. I'll take a stab at it, and then Edwin certainly back me up. But the first thing that I will say is that these conversations are uncomfortable, they're complex, and they're difficult. I think that we have to make sure that we have that emotional intelligence as we go into the dialogue with someone. And I find that if there's some type of relationship that we have been nurturing, it makes the conversation much easier because there's already a level of trust there. And that trust leads people to want to assume positive intent. And if you assume positive intent, it's easier for you to navigate those conversations, even when you know there's going to be a difference of perspective. The other thing I will say is language is so important. You know, I know that we are really angry right now. We are pained, we are traumatized, and our emotions sometimes can get the best of us. But I have been sharing with a lot of people that right now, we need to be doing our best when we're having those conversations to lead with our intellect and to bring facts to the conversation and not rely so much on our emotions, because our emotions can get the best of us. And all it takes is for someone to say something that we are offended by, and then you have aggression meeting aggression, then the conversation ends. And if the dialogue ends, then there's no hope for being able to try to learn with and from each other. And so for me, there are 3 words that I often use when I feel like I'm hitting a potential roadblock with someone. I'm really trying to have them to see my perspective and to learn or unlearn misinformation that they are subscribing to. And that is, tell me more. Because if I can get them to tell me more about their thought process, their perspective, as they start to articulate that, I find quickly they start to kind of backtrack a little bit. And so it's just amazing of how, you know, those simple words have, at least from my experiences, garnered really healthy dialogue. But I think it's also being discerning about the time in which you're approaching those individuals. Well, what would you add, Edwin?
I think you again answered it beautifully. The only thing I would say is I think it's also okay to have some non-negotiables, places where you won't agree to disagree. Like there are some things that are not up for discussion. Like if we're having a conversation and you're trying to convince me that my life doesn't matter just as much as yours or something like there are just some conversations I don't want to have, and I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince you that I matter. And so I think to Stephen's question, yes, there are some things are about a difference of perspective, but then some things are just right and other things are just wrong. And I think we have to also be willing to just say some things are wrong and be okay that some people will just choose to not see the world the way you do or agree with that, and that's okay. And I know it sounds weird to hear this from a pastor, but you don't need to have everybody as your friend. Everybody can't be an ally. There are some people who actually you need to go your separate ways. And I just think that that's a part of the conversation too.
No, that's so good. We need to protect our energy. Yes, absolutely. And there are some non-negotiables.
Yeah.
You continuing to believe that racism does not exist or that it's okay, that's a non-negotiable. And so I appreciate you amplifying that thought. Okay, any other questions or comments from those who are joined with this community? Or Amber, do you have any other questions that have come directly to you? Leona wants to share.
Hey, how you doing?
I was just gonna say there's a ton in the chat. So if you'd like to read your question, feel free, but I'm happy to do on your behalf. Go ahead, Leona.
Hey, thanks. Hey, Leona Whitmore, class of 06. I had a question, and really it's more of a, I guess, wanting some guidance, right? So, so it kind of feels like with the message, right? I understand the message is strong desire of inclusion and us to move forward and things of that nature. And I'm absolutely with that. But I want to know, how can you single out, or how do you prioritize certain individuals while including them in, right? So what I mean by that is, my perception is sometimes when we open ourselves up and say, hey, we want those allies, sometimes we give them an opportunity to co-opt our movement, right? And this is really about us right now, right? And so I want to ask the group, right? So how do we say, okay, we're embracing everybody else's struggle as ours, but it's not reciprocated. So what do we do to, you know what I mean? Like, where do we go from there is what I want to know.
I think you make sure you center the conversations on the Black experience right now. That has been my counsel to all the organizations that I'm working with. You can't win otherwise. Right now, the fight needs to be the focus of the group that is most directly impacted. And I find that if people really understand the essence of what's happening and they don't just attribute it to, and when I say it, I'm talking about the protest, the looting, whatever, however they want to characterize it. If they cannot realize that this is a matter of 400+ years of perpetuated systemic institutionalized racism, to where it's deserving for them to center the conversation on the Black experience, the Black community, helping to dismantle racism, then there's some deeper conversations and education that needs to happen. So I always try to, if someone is taking in a different direction, you know, almost the message, maybe even without saying the words, all lives matter, I bring it back to all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. So right now, that's what we're focused on. And I think that some people are getting it, but you're right, Leona, some people are not. So who else has some suggestions about this? Maybe Edwin, you can chime in, and then this is the community where we can learn with and from each other. So I invite others to, after Edwin shares, to unmute yourselves and to add what you would say to it.
I don't have anything to add. I think it's an excellent question, and I love your response. So thanks, Leona.
Yeah, one of the things too, just hearing Leona speak, one of the things that I've noticed too is that I think it's on both sides that we have to, I think we oftentimes make it easy for allies. I think that a lot of times they see people that are college educated and they say, oh, that's not you. That you know, you don't understand, you know, you're that safe person. You're the person that it's okay to come to my house. It's okay to do these things. When they have to realize is that, you know, while we have been afforded certain privileges, we are not privileged. We are still in the same struggle as that man that was on the ground that died. We are still in the same struggle as people that are not working. You know, it's such a larger picture. And I think that we have to make sure that we don't get caught up in our little small world and what's going on in our world, that we don't make it easy for some allies to think, oh, you really don't understand that, or that really doesn't apply to you. We're really all in this struggle. We may not be on that front line today with what's going on, but at some point we will, either through the system, through not being, being denied a job, being denied an opportunity, something with our child, something with our family member, you know, or something. So I think that we as a people also have to make sure that we don't just make it so comfortable for allies to think that just because they think we are at a certain level that we don't understand and can identify, because it's a large issue, but we all have had at some point some type of pain point with all that's going on.
I could just tag on what Eureka was just saying. This is Donna. And also just to support what Nika was saying also earlier in regards to the time. And to your question too, Leona, I think that there is, because we are all perceived as that educated Black person, and it's not, it couldn't possibly be happening to us. What I have found over the past 3 weeks is, as my white friends and colleagues have been reaching out to me and asking me how I'm feeling personally and professionally, how am I doing? And then they'll ask me, what can I do? And I wrote it in the chat. I've taken that opportunity to truly respond back to them. Let me tell you what you can do for me, because there is a comfortability that they have with us because they think that it's not happening to us. So I've been challenging them, and I challenge you all to turn it around and give them the truth, and let them know that what they can do for us is have the uncomfortable conversation. Like, I have challenged them to say, you know what I need? Thank you for being the one that understands and hears me and reaching out to me. But what I want you to do is reach back into your SOI, your sphere of influence, and bring together 6 white women that aren't as liberal as you. Bring together 8 of your friends that may not hear the story, but they feel comfortable hearing the story from me because I'm the educated Black woman that you think this is not happening to. And so recently I've had several conversations just with groups of white women to share my story, and for them to now see that although you think I'm living a life that is not experiencing this, I and my husband do. And I want you to hear that. And so I've had a lot, I call it awakening moments. They're realizing that this is not just happening in Minneapolis. This is not just happening, and I'm in Atlanta, so certainly it's happening in Atlanta, but it is happening in all of the different corridors. So it's not just these people off in the distance. It's happening in our city. It's happening in our county, right here in the halls that we walk, in the stores that we go to every day, that my Black experience is different than your white experience. And so by having these challenge calls, they are stepping up. And I'm happy that I can say that about my circle, that they are stepping up and that they're pulling their other white friends to the table. And they're asking me questions. I mean, I had a question the other day. She said, why is it when this man said the colors the other day, you all were so offended? But she's from Canada. And I said, Patty, thank you for asking me that. She said, is it okay for me to call you Black? Is it okay for me to call you African American or a person of color? I said, yeah, those are all fine. It's just that when you refer to us as the coloreds, then there's a difference. And she didn't understand the history, having been born and raised in Canada. So I explained the history of why the colors is totally different. And so, you know, I think that's where we step up, where we as the and I'm gonna have to get used to this U of SC family, y'all. I came out in the 80s, so I went to USC. But I think that's what, you know, I'm so proud to see all of you on this call. And I think that is our call. We are placed in position at this time right now to be able to take advantage of where we are in life and be able to say to our white counterparts, here's what you can do. Hear me, hear my story, because I still experience this every day, and I know you don't think I do.
That is so awesome. I almost feel like that is just a great way for us to, you know, end our time together tonight, is with that strong call to action to encourage those brave, courageous conversations. I think you referred to it as the challenge circle. And when we are extending ourselves to help provide answers and direction and education to our white counterparts who are seeking some type of safety with us, let's be very specific. As I said before, specificity is so important, because if we're very vague and just say, just support us, what does that mean? What does that look like? Let's make it plain for them. And so I love that. Thank you so much, Donna. So we're going to wrap up because we have reached our time, our scheduled time to adjourn for tonight. I will turn it over to Amber in just a moment, but I just personally want to thank each of you for allowing Edwin and I to hold space with this community. Thank you for seeing fit to connect and to join and to be concerned about this topic. And to lend your voice and time to what we can do as a community as we continue to try to find ways to emerge stronger. I want to end by calling a couple names. The first is I want to acknowledge those members of BAC Council that at least I know are on, and then I'll pause because it's always dangerous when you start listing names, right? But I know that Natasha Anderson's on. Thank you. Chanel Singletary, Eureka Robertson, we heard from her a moment ago. Randy Grimes, Noble is on as well. Thank you, Noble. Amber Guyton, who of course got us jump started. Am I missing any other BAC Council members?
Tim's on.
Hi, Tim, of course, part of the team that helped put this together. How could I forget you, Tim? Absolutely. Any others? Okay, charge it to my head and not my heart. I'm trying to look at the pictures. And then lastly, the other names that I want to mention right now, and one of which has come up a couple times, and I think it's so important to call these names out. While we know that there's so many more than the recent horrific incidents that have led to the death of Black men and women, there's so many others. But I do want to call their names because it gives humanity to the fact that these were lives, these were individuals, and I think that they're so deserving of that. And so once I call the names, I'm going to turn it over to Edwin to give some final remarks, and then we're going to turn it back over to you, Amber, to close this out. So I'm going to say their names: Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Rayshard, just recently, Rayshard Brooks, and all the many others. Edwin?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Nika said. This was a great conversation tonight, and hopefully just one of many. I really am proud of what the Black Alumni Council is doing, and just look forward to being a more active part moving forward. So thanks, Amber, for your part in making this happen. Thanks, Chanel, and look forward to connecting with more of you in the future.
Awesome. Now, we didn't have a time limit tonight, and there's so many questions still in the chat, so we really could have hung out probably for like another hour.
I didn't know that. I was following the well put together outline that said 8:15. Let's start to wrap it up. So that's my bad.
I appreciate you following that. No, I realize on the East Coast it's getting late, and some of you all may have dinner with family and so on. But just wanted to say that we are so appreciative to see the huge turnout that we had this evening. Again, I shared in the beginning, we had about 250 participants. Originally, it was capped at 100, and we had to pay Zoom a little extra money to open it up further. So thank you for showing up. I think that's what the Black alumni and My Carolina want the most from our community is like, we know there's so much talent, there's so much impactful alumni, especially Black alumni out here, not just in the Carolinas, but across the country and the world. And so we invite you to come and celebrate and have these dialogues with us more often. We certainly see that this has been successful, and we want to have more of these. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I apologize for the questions we were not able to get to, but Edrin is on social media, as well as Nika. Edrin Speaks, as well as Edrin Williams, and then Nika C. White, and also Nika White on all your socials. And then My Carolina would also like to take a screenshot photo, if you all don't mind taking yourselves off camera. If that's possible for you, just to I guess get a screenshot of this event. So if you don't mind taking yourself off camera, they're going to do that.
All right, so there's 3 screens on here, so I'm going to take a picture of each one. So if y'all can pose 3 times, I would greatly appreciate that. So, all right, 1, 2, 3. Okay, gonna do another one. 1, 2, 3. And last one. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank y'all.
Awesome, thank you, Charnay. So everyone, as we mentioned in the beginning, please engage with us. Follow My Carolina on social media at My Carolina, as well as at My Carolina BAC for the Black alumni. our annual scholarship that goes to incoming and current Black students at USC is so important. The Richard T. Greener Scholarship, mycarolina.org/greener for more information there, and then more information on how to get involved, mycarolina.org/Black alumni. So thank you all again for taking the time out this evening to fellowship and be with us, and we hope to see you again.
Awesome. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Have
Bye.
a great Juneteenth.
Yes, happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Nika.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, Amber.